Overdrive. Today we road test a very affordable Citroen electric hatchback, drive the Mahindra Thar two-wheel drive and check out the Moto Morini CMezzo. Hello and welcome to Overdrive. I am Soini Dutt. Citroen has unveiled their very first affordable electric hatchback in the country, the C3. Now the eC3 will be the second mainstream electric offering for India after the Tiago EV. It will suit your pocket and it promises an ARAI certified driving range of 320 kilometers. To win us all the details.
Now you might be wondering what we're doing driving the Citroen C3 all over again. But that's not quite right, is it? Because this is in fact the Citroen eC3, the newest affordable EV you can buy in the country right now. The Citroen eC3 uses a 29.2 kWh LFP battery pack, which gives it 320 kilometers of ARAI range. Now this should be good for about 240 to 260 kilometers in the real world, since we saw 220 kilometers on the readout with about 96% charge left. Notably, this battery pack is naturally cooled with passing air, unlike most of the liquid-cooled setups you currently see. The battery pack can function between minus 10 to 55 degrees Celsius and also ford water without trouble, although an IP rating isn't mentioned. Otherwise, the pack can withstand nail penetration as well. Now the eC3 can charge it up to 30 kilowatts of DC fast charging, and Citroen says that you don't need to keep alternating between DC and AC charging to preserve the battery. Just on DC charging, the Citroen will still be fine. Now as for AC charging, it only accepts 3.3 kilowatt, which is a bit less, but you can also charge it from a home socket in about 10.5 hours. Now we're driving the eC3 around quite a short track, so our impressions of how the car has to drive are quite preliminary. But it must be said that the 57 PS and the 143 Newton meter that this car makes, it's quite a bit less than its petrol counterparts, but it never feels inadequate. So with that crisp EV torque delivery, you always seem to make easy progress, as is true for most EVs, even though in this case it's not quite that sharp, really, jerky acceleration that you come to expect in certain EVs. It's much more natural, it builds progressively. And Citroen says that the eC3 will do 0 to 60 in 6.8 seconds, which seems fair, and it will go up to a 107 kmph top speed. It's limited, but it must be said that the eC3 does get up to 107 kmph reasonably easily. We can't tell you how this electric eC3 rides in regular Indian conditions, but on track the sense of solidity that comes through in the ICE version seems to have been retained. It's still got nearly that same well-judged steering feel and still handles in that progressive, predictable manner that makes it quite easy to use in traffic or around corners. The added weight is apparent, of course, but like most EVs, the low center of gravity does counter that effect to an extent. Now another trait that we've started to like is the way switch from delivering power to slowing down to regen quite naturally. There is no abruptness, no sort of hesitation, and the regen level also varies with the speed. You can't choose, you can't select a specific regen level, but say at higher speeds above 80 or above 70, there's less regen just like you would want on the highway, and then at lower city speeds there's quite a bit of regen. There's no one pedal driving, so you won't come to a complete halt, but you will slow down to say a 7 or 8 kilometer per hour crawl. So as with most EVs, the eC3 is quite good to drive. It's not the most exciting EV, but it must be said that for a small city car, it gets the job done really quite well. Now, like we mentioned, you can choose between a standard and an eco mode. Now the eco mode will reduce torque outputs. It's not just to reduce throttle response, so it reduces the torque to about 120 Newton meter, and Citroen says that will give you about 10 to 11% more range, which is a good deal, we'd suppose. You'd be hard pressed to spot the Citroen eC3 from the ICE version. There's still a grille just like the petrol version, possibly for the naturally cooled battery, so the only differentiator is the new dual tone paint options and the small E badges that dot the fenders. There has been a 10 mm drop in ground clearance to 170 mm with the new battery pack. Now on the inside, the EC3 is near identical to the regular petrol powered C3, but of course there are some differences. For example, you get this toggle type selector which is quite heavily inspired from the one in the C5 Aircross, the facelifted one. There's no park mode, which is a bit of a miss, but what you do get is an eco drive mode. So that should help you eke out extra range when, say, you're low on power and so on and so forth. Now you get a slightly different digital instrument cluster with the electric C3. Now it's the same basic unit as the petrol C3, but it's to a black background, so it looks a touch classy, a bit better integrated. And there is a bit more information on offer. For example, you now have a clear readout between the power and the regen level, unlike, say, the missing tachometer in the petrol C3. But other than that, it's still quite bare in its information. So you just get a charge level readout, a range readout, and the 2 trip computers. There's still no efficiency readout, so that is still something that Citroen could have worked on. Now a few more minor differences separate the EC3 from the petrol C3. To start with, the seats, they now have this black seat cover instead of the off-whitish one that you found in the petrol C3. You finally get a day-night rear view mirror, which was a stark miss in the petrol version. And this 10-inch touchscreen, it already had that wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay connectivity. Now it adds connected tech features to it. Of course, they're phone-based, but now they do have been added.
Usefully, boot space hasn't been compromised. It's still 315 litres with a spare wheel provided for good measure.
Now in terms of how the EC3 feels in the backseat, things are somewhat similar to the petrol version, but not quite. So what is similar is that you have that same quite comfortable and wide bench with the same nice angle of recline and the very well thought out cushioning. But what is different is that the floor is a bit higher, of course, now to put in the battery, which sits here before the boot. So which means that you sit in a bit of a knees up position. It's not quite as comfortable as in the petrol C3. As you can see, there's not that much thigh support. So yeah, you are losing out a bit of comfort, but it must be said that as far as EVs go, this is really not bad at all.
The Citroen eC3 carries on in the mold of the C3. It's got a sound EV powertrain, useful range for a city runabout, and the sense of space and comfort that Citroen does so well with the petrol version. We would have liked more equipment again, but we hope Citroen gets the pricing right. Our hope is a rupees sub 10 lakh entry price to fully capitalize on the fairly sparse playing field that the Citroen eC3 has to itself in the EV space.
Well, in our estimation, Citroen will be pricing the EC3 between 10 to 12 lakh rupees, and that will certainly make things very interesting in this affordable EV space. We'll take a very quick break here on the show with